What's going on, guys? It's Bromley Empire Barbell, and today we're going to talk about specificity, specifically as it has to do with preparing for a meet or for a contest peak. Specificity just describes how that in order to put out a complete 100% performance with a specific goal, you have to have all of your training dialed in around all of the subtleties and nuances and complexities about that one thing. That means you have to do that thing. So if you think about a bench press, the way that you improve your bench press is by doing more bench presses. Now, surely there's other movements you can do that carry over to your bench press or that will help augment your bench press. But you could have the biggest upper body in the world. You could be able to put out more force in that direction than anybody else in the world. But if you are not conditioned to the parameters of pressing on a bench with a barbell in your hands, you are going to come up short. So much of what we do has to do with coordination. It has to do with how your nervous system operates. It's not just about muscles communicating with each other and getting their timing down. It's about the coordination that happens within a muscle. It's actually intramuscular coordination as far as the timing with which individual motor units are recruited relative to each other and how quickly that happens. And that can only happen when you're training specifically to the actual event that you are getting ready for. Now, that's extra true in strongman, which is what I do, because there's so many different movement types. They all require their own specificity. We're so far past the days where you take a bunch of strong guys and just throw them into some things they've never done before and see how they do. There's a reason that the log press record stood at 375 for decades, and then all of a sudden it jumped to over 500 pounds. And now there's multiple guys that are capable of 500-pound log presses. It's because people started to specialize by training that movement specifically. And as they did that, their training evolved around that movement to make better decisions. Their technique got better, their comfortability with the movement got better. And that will always lead to a substantially greater performance than when it's some completely novel thing that you've never seen before. And this is the big thing that coaches are up against when it comes to movements, especially when you have very varied events like CrossFit and strongman, where you kind of have to be ready for everything because you're never going to do better than specialization and specificity. So I'm going to use as an example how I prep for nationals with these different events, but as an example, you're going to notice a trend when it comes to peaking for a meet. This is a basic tenet of periodization, is you generally tend to see going from broad to narrow. So it's not just high volume down to low volume and then low intensity down to very, very high intensity. You tend to see broad movements, more variation, more varied movement selection, and a wider variety of reps, all with typically more volume. And then as time goes on, as you go through the phases, you get a little bit more specific, a little closer to how you're actually going to compete. And then the block right before you compete is going to be complete specificity. And that's where you take all of the physical characteristics that you've gained and you funnel it down to the most specific training you can possibly do to make sure that they are realized in the context of coordination and the energy systems that need to be optimized that all represent what you're going to experience in the actual meet. So take a max squat, for example. If you're a power lifter, you're getting ready for a max squat. Let's assume that you're not geared, that you're not in a squat suit, but you do wear wraps and a belt. So starting out, you're gonna do a lot of your work maybe beltless and wrapless. That's a variation. It's a way of disadvantaging yourself. And you're gonna try to grow some size by doing a variety of rep ranges. You're gonna do more volume, more total sets, more total reps. You're probably gonna have the weight dialed back, although some guys will put in token touches at a top 3 or 2 maybe here and there just to keep themselves a little strength specific. But most of the work is gonna be defined by lower percentages and more total reps. You might have variations. You might do pause squats, tempo squats, box squats. You might alternate your stance going from narrow to wide or vice versa. You might include more isolation work. Your sessions might go a lot longer. As you start to get into what is typically a strength transition phase, the volume is going to drop a bit, and it's going to drop by eliminating stuff that is less specific to what you're going to do. So you're probably going to add your belt at this point as the weight gets heavier. Maybe you leave the wraps off, maybe you go to sleeves, maybe you even throw the wraps on at this point, but you're going to start to incorporate gear. If you're a equipped squatter, you might put the suit on but keep the straps down at this phase. You're probably going to stick to your competition stance at this point. You might still do some variations that are very close to what your contest squat looks like. Adding a pause is still pretty close. You might eliminate some of the isolation work or some of the single leg work just so you can do more total sets in your actual competition setup. And the reps are not only going to get lower, as the weight climbs up, but they're also going to be more focused. It's going to be a smaller margin of reps that you're going to work with. Now, eventually, you're going to end up into the taper, the peak. You might have 6 weeks, you might have 3 weeks, depends on the lifter and how they're used to running things. But this is going to be all of your gear. If you compete in a suit, you're going to have your suit on. If you compete just belt and wraps, you're going to have your belt and wraps on. Everything's going to be your contest setup. There's going to be little to no variations. There might be a couple, but most of your work is going to be in your competition setup. And you're probably going to be down to singles only. And if not, maybe some doubles and triples, but it's going to be a lot of strength specific work gearing up for a 1 rep max, and you're going to have some progression that has all of the work accumulated at that point focused on what you're going to do. Now, this does a couple of things. One, it dials you into the movement pattern. So this is just specific practice, meaning you're going to get very coordinated and very comfortable with the demands of the contest, but it also is going to represent a drop in volume. When we talk about going from high volume to low volume, that doesn't necessarily mean that you start out with the most absolute volume that you can handle. A high volume phase isn't marked by doing German volume training. You don't have to fit in as much work as you can physically do. It's high volume because you're doing more variations, more total reps, a wider variety of work. So just by doing 5 or 6 exercises for a few sets each, that's going to be a lot higher volume than what you do in your taper. So by the time you get down to this peak, you're doing very little work. It's just very, very intense and very focused. So this is also going to represent a period of recovery where the increase in specific work along with the extra recovery, you see a nice big increase in your ability to put out more force, to lift more weight. You're going to notice you get a lot stronger. So as we use an example, because we do have to consider carryover, if we have variations in training, we want to leave in the things that really help us, but we want to remove the things that are detrimental, that might not really lend itself to specific growth in that thing towards the end. A good example is deadlifting. I had this contest that had a deadlift, had a log, had a yoke, also had a Husfeld stone and a bag toss. Squatting has for a long time been the backbone of my strongman growth. It's been, if my squat's high, specifically my front squat, that my loading was good, tire flips were good, I would do better with bags and stones, and I would actually notice my pull would be a little bit better. So as I got into this contest, I noticed there was really nothing in there that benefited directly from squatting. So specifically with some of the knee issues I had with some patellar tendonitis that was turning into a pain in the ass, and how hard it would be to squat and say do really fast yokes in the same week, I decided about 10 weeks out to just eliminate squatting. And I was gonna run my entire peak outside of the context of this thing that I've always leaned on to prop me up, because I figured it would be more of a detriment than it would be an asset. So specificity didn't really mandate that my squat be that much higher than a certain level. And I've always been a very good squatter, so I didn't really need to lean on it. So what I did is I removed squatting. Now, one way you know that you ran a peak very well is if by the end you are very dialed into the movements that you trained, but you also suck at everything else. That tells you that you did not waste any energy on superfluous stuff that wasn't really going to help your end goal. Now, that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around, losing gains as you get closer to a meet. It's something I actually look forward to because it gives you a much needed break from the same beat down of the same stimulus. It can help you recover from overuse issues, recover from injuries, or prevent injuries. And also, comebacks happen so stupidly quick. They just really do. It's nice for me to leave squatting alone for a while because when I come back to it, it is going to grow just so exponentially fast. I'm going to get back to where I was in a matter of 4 or 5 weeks, and my joints will probably feel better while I do it. So it's a nice break, and that's part of the normal ebb and flow of training. So don't be afraid, especially if you're getting ready for a meet, don't be afraid to take attention away from the things that aren't really going to help you for the meet, because they will come back brutally fast and you'll probably be better for it. You probably need the break at that point. To add on to that, after nationals, about a week after, me and Andrew Mock decided to go to Big Speed and Strength out in Fontana. It's ran by Jacob Finnerty. That's where Nadia Stowers trains. She's a very gifted middleweight strong woman, very, very strong athlete. She missed her pro card by 1 point. But we went out there because they have a nice big run of stones. They probably have the biggest selection of heavy stones I've seen anywhere. And we only have a couple big jumps. So the heaviest one we have is a 435 to 22 inch. It is a big stone. And we've loaded it, but it's very impractical and most stones aren't that size. So he has some 21-inch stones that are more standard. They have inserts that go all the way up. So Andrew wanted to max his stone. Well, I haven't done any stone work in probably the better part of this year. It's probably been about a year since I've taken stone work seriously, and I haven't been squatting. Squatting is really the thing that allows me to extend on a front load like that, and that's been the backbone of my stone loading. So what do? when we get to this heavy stone, after not training stone for so long, me and Andrew both peaked our deadlift, so our hinge is very strong, but we haven't been squatting, so our squat's in the toilet. So what happened? I lapped the heaviest stone I ever have in my entire life. I got 5'11", 3 inches off the ground. The fact that I got it off the ground, I couldn't believe. And then I got a 487 in my lap, but I've never missed a stone load from the lap. I've never lapped something and not been able to load it. So my hinge was so good that I was able to lap this heavy stone, but because my squat was in the crapper, I wasn't able to get any extension on it whatsoever. And that's an example of specificity. So I can't beat myself up too much because it was a kind of PR. It was the heaviest stone I've ever touched, but it was also something that I was not prepared for whatsoever. And I know that if I go back to training stones diligently, especially if I go back to getting my squat fleshed out, that I'm probably going to stand a better chance of standing up with it, but we'll see. So that is an example of how specificity plays in to your performance with any one thing. It's not practical to think everything's going to go up. Over a long period of time, yes, but in the short term, we pick and choose what we focus on to get the best result. So these are the events that we got ready for. Log for reps, we had 1 minute, we had to clean and press at 290 log, had to go back down to the floor each time, and that sucks because it makes it like cardio. So I knew that energy system optimization, getting my capacity up was going to be huge, not just my press. So I focused mainly on getting comfortable clean and pressing a log for a lot of reps over an entire minute, getting that energy system taken care of, but also getting my press stronger, because the more absolute strength I have in my strict press, the bigger margin of error I have on an event like that. I don't have to be so specific, because in a contest, when you get that log cleaned, you end up leaning back, you end up walking around, you're looking up at the ceiling, it's very disorienting. And I found that having a stronger press overall means that I can get the press out quicker and I don't have to be so specifically dialed in, because that's where things go wrong. That's where people get frustrated. And as they fatigue, they're not able to stick those later reps. So I did a lot of volume. Reps were from 3 all the way up to 15. I did light clean and presses around 60% of contest weight for the minute to start to get my energy system used to that work. And then I did heavier floor presses, strict presses, and actually barbell jerks, because I was having some shoulder issues and jerks were easier on my shoulder. Push presses at that time were causing some pain, so I decided to leave that out. That did exactly what it was supposed to do, and I actually gained some strength while letting my shoulder heal up. So midway through, I switched to log push presses, which were also nice because it's elevated up, so push pressing didn't quite require as much of a beat down. It didn't cause as much of a beat down on my shoulder. And this is where we start getting more specific. So instead of floor presses, I switched to overhead pin presses, which is a more specific lockout work. I went a little heavier on the clean and presses, and my reps were a little more narrow, 3 to 6 on just about everything. By the end, I'm literally, last 4 weeks, I did almost no accessory. I would go in twice a week and I would do my log clean and presses. I was in my full gear. I had my sleeves and my grip shirt on, and I was doing 30-second to 1 minute runs, really just focusing on tempo, on cycling through reps at a specific pace. I'm making sure I could transition quickly off my shoulders, making sure that I knew how to breathe right, making sure that I took everything into consideration that involved being as fast and efficient as possible, because that's how I was going to put up the best result. And everything was 80% and up, so it was a little more specific to the contest weight. This is the flow of specificity that allowed me to peak. I ended up hitting 6 reps in a minute. I locked 7 out about 4 seconds after they called time, which was a little frustrating, but I still tied for first in the event, and that's entirely because I paced myself. There were some good pressers, really good pressers, when we got 3 reps or 4 reps, because more than likely they didn't practice pacing themselves and they gassed out, and that's what happens. Yoke was very similar. Earlier out, I'm doing more variations. There's a high knee variation and kind of a tempo, like slow walk that we do to get used to being under the load for more time. And these variations we did beltless, and we kept it at about 60 feet. We didn't do very long runs. We wanted to focus on footwork, and we did some variations in that footwork, but we were just focused on getting comfortable getting under a yoke again. We got more specific to contest halfway through. We put on a belt, we went heavier. Now instead of doing the tempo or high knees, we're doing sprints. We're trying to focus on being fast now, and we went for the full 120 feet. And then for the last 4 weeks, it was literally just contest runs, very close to contest weight, trucking down and back, practicing transition, feeling how our footwork was gonna go. That's how that went. Deadlifts, no different. Deadlifts, we were beltless in the beginning. I was actually experimenting with sumo deadlifts. I've talked crap about sumo as a feat of strength. I still don't like it. as a movement variation, as an accessory, it's very viable, and that's pretty well proven. So I actually experimented with that. I didn't hate it. I'm not sure that I would throw it in again, but I was new to it. I was stronger in it than I expected I'd be. So I don't know that that really addresses a weakness on me that I need to focus on. But I did a ton of GHDs, RDLs, I did a lot of reverse hypers to get my erectors ready, my history of low back issues. I wanted to make sure my midsection was just as rock solid, because historically I don't do a lot of maximal pulling because I worry about it. So I was really focused on getting those weaknesses rounded out. Again, higher reps, more variation, more total volume. As we go down, fewer exercises. I cut out the sumo deadlifts. My variations, I was doing pause at the knee, I was doing some deficit sets, but everything looked pretty much like the way I was gonna pull. I was still doing this accessory into closer to the contest week because I really wanted my erectors strong, but my reps were more focused, 1 to 5 on all the main movements, and a lot less total work. 4 weeks out, deadlifting, full gear, singles only. If I was getting ready for something like Worlds that allows a suit, this is where I would put the suit on. We didn't have a suit, but we had straps. And then this is where I had everything really focused into that movement. No variations at this point, no deficit, no pause. Everything is how I was gonna pull in contest. So this general cycle of focusing on specificity, not just in the movements we select, but in the rep ranges, in the threshold, in the energy system we're doing. This is how periodization works. And the great thing, and I just said it, you did it right. You become very, very dialed into the demands of the contest, and you'll actually notice you detrain, you decondition into everything else. Well, you're not getting tested in everything else. So you don't have to focus on keeping other things up unless they are things that directly help you. If squatting was somehow a really big part of my deadlift, if I noticed that my squat going down led my deadlift to go down, I would have to rearrange my training to accommodate that, but it didn't, so I leave that out. I hit an all-time deadlift PR at a 719, and I felt pretty good. It actually went up way easier than I expected. It surprised me off the floor, because usually I get stuck off the floor. But my squat's in the crapper. A week after, as a recovery exercise, I did 3 sets of 5 on front squats with 145 pounds, just to get my body to remember what it felt like. I followed that up with 3 sets of kettlebell swings. I used a 50-pound bag for like 3 sets of 10 on swings. My hamstrings and quads were sore for 4 days. So that tells you how deconditioned I was to all of these things. But that tells me that once I start squatting, which I plan on doing next week, the growth is gonna be stupid because I am that sensitive to it right now. So this is how specificity works. This is how you should be planning out your contest prep, even if you're not planning for a contest. This is a very helpful guideline to keep you waving back and forth between high volume, low volume, broad work, narrow work. Going back and forth will help all of you to keep progress going. So if you have any questions about this, leave it in the comment box or go ahead and take it to the forum, empire-forum.com. Thank you for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley at Empire Barbell. I'll see you.